The empath's most dangerous transformation, Carl Jung's final warning. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung. There comes a moment in every empath's life when their kindness stops being a weakness and becomes their greatest weapon. This is the moment of dangerous transformation when compassion evolves into clarity and sensitivity becomes strength. Jung warned that the awakened empath is no longer easily controlled because they have learned to see the truth behind every mask. In today's video, we'll explore what happens when the light inside you learns to defend itself. Have you ever felt that your empathy has both healed and hurt you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire someone who's still finding their power. 1. The awakening of the dangerous empath. Carl Jung described the awakening of the dangerous empath as the moment a deeply kind and sensitive soul finally realizes their true power. And this transformation is not rooted in aggression, but in clarity. Because once you begin to trust your perceptions and stop doubting what your inner knowing has been telling you for years, you instantly become immune to the subtle manipulations that once shaped your choices. This shift marks a true spiritual awakening, where spirituality is no longer something you practice only in quiet moments, but something that lives inside every decision you make, because you start recognizing that your sensitivity was never a flaw. It was your compass. As this awareness strengthens, you begin integrating the parts of yourself you were taught to suppress, the quiet anger that protects your boundaries, the intuition that senses what words try to hide, and the deep emotional intelligence that notices the undercurrents others ignore. And instead of trying to appear easygoing, you allow these parts to rise and unify, forming a self that is whole, grounded, and impossible to deceive. This integration changes how you move through the world because you stop apologizing for your awareness, no longer softening the truth to protect someone else's comfort, and no longer shrinking to make yourself more palatable. You become the kind of empath who can look at a situation and see all the layers at once, not just what someone says, but what they mean. Not just the story they present, but the intention beneath it. This is what Jung meant when he said that the kindest souls become dangerous once they understand themselves. They stop abandoning their inner truth to keep the peace, and they stop confusing kindness with self-sacrifice. You learn that saying no is not cruelty, it is clarity. You learn that stepping away is not coldness, it is self-respect. And you begin to see that your sensitivity once used against you is actually your most precise form of intelligence. As this transformation deepens, your relationships shift. You no longer respond to guilt, flattery, or urgency the way you once did, because your intuition now sits in the driver's seat, and the patterns that used to trap you lose their power. Instead of absorbing other people's emotions, you observe them. Instead of trying to fix everything, you choose what actually aligns with your values. Instead of over-explaining, you let your boundaries stand on their own. Professionally, this awakening reveals your creative power because you stop agreeing to roles that depend on your silence or compliance, and you step into responsibilities that honor your depth and your insight. You discover that your presence itself becomes more commanding, not loud, not forceful, but unmistakably grounded. At its core, this is the transformation Jung warned us about. When an empath stops being controlled by fear, confusion, or self-doubt, they become a person who cannot be manipulated, and that makes them dangerous only to the patterns that once thrived on their softness. Their sensitivity becomes strength. Their intuition becomes strategy, and their inner light, once dimmed to comfort others, begins to shine with quiet authority. And when this happens, the empath no longer moves through life as someone who survives the world. They move through it as someone who can finally see it clearly. If this message resonates with you, comment below. I am stepping into my dangerous awakening. Your words help anchor your transformation and support our spiritual wisdom community. 2. From victimhood to conscious power. Empaths spend much of their lives moving through families, workplaces, and relationships as emotional shock absorbers, quietly taking on pain that was never theirs to hold. And Jung explained that this pattern does not come from pure love, but from an unconscious fear of abandonment that conditions you to soothe others before you soothe yourself, making you believe that peace depends on how well you bury your own needs. Yet this fragile balance eventually shatters, usually through a deep betrayal that forces you into a moment of undeniable truth, where the breakdown becomes the doorway to a higher form of spiritual development and the awakening of the self you once hid to survive. In that moment, you begin to see clearly how long you've mistaken self-sacrifice for loyalty, how often you diluted your intuition just to maintain harmony, and how deeply you believed that love had to be earned through endurance. As the shock settles, something powerful rises. The parts of you that were pushed into the shadows, your instincts, your intelligence, your emotional boundaries, and the righteous anger you were taught to suppress, emerge as strength, clarity, and inner truth, revealing that your sensitivity was never a curse, but a form of spirituality that becomes sharper once you stop giving yourself away. This shift is what Jung described as shadow integration, the moment when you stop existing as the wounded healer and begin reconnecting with the self you abandoned long ago. And this integration turns the empath into someone dangerous only because they can no longer be manipulated by guilt, chaos, or emotional games. You start recognizing patterns before they unfold, sensing truth beneath tone, and refusing to shrink yourself just to keep the peace. And because you finally see your own worth, the old survival behaviors dissolve. People-pleasing loses its grip. Silence is no longer your prison, and relationships built on emotional imbalance can no longer survive your presence. This transformation deepens as you reclaim your own energy, no longer pouring your compassion into people who drain it, no longer apologizing for your intuition, and no longer trying to heal others at the cost of wounding yourself. And what once felt like weakness becomes your inner authority, guiding you toward connections that honor your emotional truth rather than exploit it. Through this awakening, you become someone who does not fear losing people who were never committed, someone who embraces conflict when necessary because truth matters more than approval, and someone who recognizes that love without boundaries is not love, but self-erasure. Jung believed that this stage is where an empath becomes whole, because you stop living from fear and begin living from consciousness, stepping fully into the person you were meant to be before the world taught you to disappear. And as this transformation unfolds, its message becomes unmistakable. You were never meant to carry suffering that was not yours. You were never meant to trade your peace for acceptance, and you were never meant to forget your own power in order to keep others comfortable. True spiritual development begins when you stop abandoning yourself, when you trust the wisdom of your sensitivity, and when you choose to stand in the clarity that has been inside you all along. 3. Shadow integration and psychological wholeness. In the language of Carl Jung, this stage of your evolution is the nigredo, the inner dusk where the false self finally collapses under the weight of truth. And for an empath, this collapse almost always begins with betrayal. Betrayal forces you to look at the very things you tried to avoid, because the moment someone breaks what little trust you had left, the unconscious rises to the surface with a force you can no longer suppress. It is the breaking point that becomes the breakthrough, pulling you into a depth of awareness you didn't know you possessed. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, Jung warned, and this is the precise moment when that truth becomes real within you. As the emotional chaos settles, something extraordinary forms inside you, a calm that is not numbness, but integration. Your emotions and your intellect stop fighting each other and instead merge into a single, razor-sharp lens through which you see people clearly, not through fear, not through hope, and not through the stories you once told yourself to maintain peace. This alignment between truth and perception is the birth of psychological wholeness, and manipulators feel it immediately, even before you do. They sense that you are no longer accessible in the old way, because the buttons they used to push no longer exist. The version of you who absorbed blame, softened red flags, and excused harmful behavior has quietly died. From this inner stillness, your voice changes. You don't speak from anger, you speak from precision. You no longer raise your voice, yet your words strike with the accuracy of someone who finally sees all the invisible patterns at play. This is why your clarity terrifies people who once depended on your confusion. They cannot twist your emotions because your inner world is no longer fragmented. They cannot pull you into arguments because you no longer dance with dysfunction. You simply state the truth as it is, and the truth itself becomes confrontation without needing confrontation. This shift is subtle but powerful. You stop explaining your boundaries, and you stop apologizing for seeing what you see. You stop mistaking kindness for silence, and you stop negotiating your worth. As you integrate your shadow, the part of you that once held fear, hurt, denial, and old patterns, you become someone who cannot be deceived, because everything that once hid in darkness is now illuminated from within. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And in this transformation, you finally reclaim authorship over your fate. What truly makes the empath dangerous is not aggression, harshness, or emotional withdrawal. What makes you dangerous is your wholeness. It is the steady, grounded awareness that sees through manipulation before it begins. The calm refusal to engage in chaos. The silence that exposes lies more effectively than confrontation ever could. You become the kind of person who dismantles illusion simply by telling the truth plainly. Your presence becomes a mirror that people with hidden motives cannot tolerate, because your clarity reveals everything they hoped you wouldn't notice. And in this integrated state, you finally understand that your greatest power was never your sensitivity alone, Your real power is the union of sensitivity and awareness, the ability to walk through darkness with light that does not flicker, and to recognize that the most dangerous empath is the one who can no longer be controlled by anything outside of themselves. Have you ever faced your shadow and embraced it with compassion? If you have, share your experience in the comments to inspire others on their path of healing. If not, the comment, "I'm ready to face my shadow," today marks the beginning of your journey toward psychological wholeness. 4. Selective empathy and boundaries. Selective empathy is the moment an awakened empath learns that loving everyone without limits is not divine. It is self-erasure. True spirituality teaches that compassion without boundaries leads to exhaustion, and empathy without discernment becomes emotional dependency. Boundaries are not cold walls. They are sacred lines that define where your light ends and another's begins. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the awakening of the soul into its authentic self, free from the prison of others' expectations. To care selectively is to love consciously, with awareness rather than impulse. It means understanding that you can hold compassion for someone's pain without making their suffering your home. When you stop rescuing everyone, you begin rescuing yourself. Boundaries are not rejection. They are the language of self-respect. They teach others how to meet you, how to value your time, and how to honor your energy. This is not selfishness. It is clarity. Imagine empathy as a river. Without banks, it floods and destroys. With boundaries, it flows with strength, direction, and purpose. You are that river. When you allow your energy to spill into every broken vessel, you weaken your current. But when you create banks of discernment, you nourish the land that truly receives you. Selective empathy does not mean loving less. It means loving wisely. It transforms pity into empowerment and obligation into conscious choice. You stop giving from guilt and start giving from wholeness. Jung's vision of individuation is not about separating from the world, but returning to it with your soul intact. It is the sacred journey from reaction to response, from confusion to clarity, from people-pleasing to peace. In spiritual awakening, you learn that every no, said with truth, creates space for a deeper yes aligned with your purpose. You stop absorbing every emotion around you like a sponge and start radiating light like a lighthouse guiding, not drowning. This is the heart of spiritual maturity. Understanding that love without boundaries becomes chaos, and empathy without structure becomes suffering. As you evolve, you begin to recognize the difference between compassion that heals and compassion that depletes. You no longer apologize for protecting your peace, because peace is your highest service to the world. When you stand firm in your truth, you allow others to find theirs. And this is where spirituality and spiritual awakening converge, where empathy becomes strength, boundaries become freedom, and your soul finally stands unshaken in its own divine clarity. 5. Trusting intuition and reclaiming power. You begin to awaken the moment you stop doubting your own perceptions and start honoring what your soul has always whispered. This is where spirituality becomes a living force, and spiritual development transforms from theory into embodied truth. When you start trusting your intuition instead of dismissing it, you instantly become immune to gaslighting, because you no longer rely on external validation to confirm what you already know internally. The empath, who once absorbed everyone's emotions unconsciously, now evolves into a conscious observer who sees manipulation in real time, yet chooses not to engage. You begin to understand that awareness itself is power, because you can see through illusion and still stay calm within it. And as Carl Jung wrote, true power is not about domination. It is having the capacity to destroy, but choosing not to. In that restraint lies your quiet authority. You realize that every reaction, once stolen by fear, now becomes a deliberate response guided by clarity. When others try to provoke you, you no longer defend or justify. You simply recognize energy for what it is and decide if it deserves your participation. This is emotional maturity at its highest form, where control no longer comes from suppressing feelings, but from mastering the energy behind them. Your silence begins to speak louder than your words. Your boundaries radiate self-respect, and your presence naturally commands peace. In this state, you embody compassion without becoming a savior, because you finally understand that saving yourself first is what truly serves others. The empath's transformation is not about becoming harder. It's about becoming clearer. You no longer mistake empathy for obligation or kindness for submission. You understand that saying no is a sacred act of self-love, and holding space for your truth is the most profound expression of compassion. You integrate the shadow you once feared, your anger, your grief, your intuition, your authority. And in doing so, you stop fragmenting yourself to fit into other people's comfort zones. Integration gives you freedom, and freedom gives you peace. You no longer hide your fire to keep others warm. You learn to be the steady flame that lights your own path, illuminating truth without burning yourself out. From this awareness, daily life becomes a spiritual practice. Before you respond, you check in with your body. What does my intuition feel right now? You let silence guide you before words do. You allow truth to rise without rushing it. Every decision becomes a reflection of inner trust rather than external pressure. You start noticing that energy never lies, and manipulation can't exist where there is awareness. You stop absorbing pain that isn't yours, because you now see it clearly and release it with compassion. And as this mastery unfolds, you realize that spiritual development is not about becoming untouchable, it's about becoming unshakable. You hold your peace like a sacred instrument, and your restraint becomes the ultimate symbol of strength. You live Carl Jung's insight every day. Real power is measured by what you choose not to destroy. Through trust, awareness, and integration, you become your own sanctuary, a living embodiment of spirituality grounded in truth, grace, and unwavering self-respect. If this message helped you trust your inner voice a little more, don't forget to subscribe for more spiritual wisdom on reclaiming your power and walking boldly in your truth. 6. The mirror effect and ethical strength. When an empath truly awakens, they become a living mirror reflecting truth so clearly that it leaves no place for deceit to hide. Around them, those who are genuine feel a deep sense of safety, while those who manipulate feel the walls closing in, exposed by the empath's quiet discernment. Yet as Carl Jung warned, when the shadow is integrated without moral grounding, the line between clarity and corruption begins to blur. Power, when not guided by compassion, becomes a weapon disguised as wisdom. True spiritual wisdom lies not in seeing everything, but in knowing what to do with what you see. Some awakened souls use their insight to heal. Others, consumed by pain, use it to punish. The difference lies in intention. An empath who walks the higher path chooses conscious love that is not naive, but fierce and discerning. It is the love that tells the truth even when it trembles, that protects without controlling, that forgives without forgetting the lesson. When your empathy evolves into awareness, you begin to understand that sensitivity is not weakness, but refined perception. You see through manipulation, not to judge, but to liberate yourself from it. Jung once said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people. To know your darkness is to take responsibility for your shadow before it takes responsibility for you. It is to understand that your emotional radar, once used for pleasing others, can now be used to honor truth." But Jung's final warning echoes. If you awaken your shadow without anchoring it in ethics, you risk becoming what once hurt you. Many empaths fall into this trap, mistaking control for care or revenge for justice until they realize that power without love is hollow. To live with spiritual wisdom means to choose awareness over impulse. It is not about proving others wrong, but about staying right within yourself. Every boundary you set becomes a statement of self-respect. Every silence you keep becomes a refusal to feed chaos. You do not fight darkness with more darkness. You disarm it with clarity. You learn to walk away not out of fear, but out of faith that peace is more valuable than validation. And so, the empath's most dangerous transformation is not the ability to expose others. It is the ability to stay kind while being fully awake. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." To live this truth is to let your empathy mature into strength, your perception into purpose, and your heart into an instrument of discernment. When you combine compassion with conscience, love becomes both your sword and your shield. This is the sacred balance of power and mercy, the mark of a true awakened empath who no longer absorbs the world's pain, but transforms it into light. 7. Transformation in relationships and society. In love, the awakened empath no longer confuses chaos for passion or emotional rescue for love. They now crave emotional maturity, honesty, and balance. They are no longer drawn to drama or the thrill of fixing others, because their spiritual awakening has taught them that true connection is born from clarity, not confusion. They stop chasing those who drain their peace, and instead, they become magnetic to those who meet them in truth. Every relationship now reflects the level of their healing. Those built on illusion dissolve, and those rooted in authenticity grow stronger. As Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." For the awakened empath, fate is no longer a trap of unhealed patterns, but a conscious choice made through awareness. In family dynamics, this transformation shakes the foundation of old roles. The empath, who once absorbed everyone's pain, who once played the peacemaker, fixer, or silent sufferer, begins to withdraw from those toxic scripts. They stop trying to save what refuses to change and understand that healing does not mean carrying everyone's burdens. Their refusal to participate in dysfunction forces the system to evolve or collapse. And this collapse, though painful, is sacred. It reveals the truth that love without respect is control, and loyalty without boundaries is self-betrayal. Through this process, spirituality becomes practical. It is not about endless forgiveness, but about alignment with what honors the soul. The awakened empath finally says, "This is where the cycle ends with me," turning generational pain into generational wisdom. At work, their perception sharpens like light through a prism. They no longer endure environments fueled by manipulation, fear, or power games. They sense toxicity before it takes form, hearing the hidden tones behind words and feeling the weight of false intentions. The awakened empath aligns their career with integrity and purpose, choosing work that nourishes rather than depletes. They understand that success without peace is failure in disguise, and so they walk away from anything that compromises their spirit, even if it looks impressive from the outside. In doing so, they redefine success not as status, but as authenticity. Their spiritual awakening becomes a silent revolution against exploitation, proving that peace and purpose can coexist. In friendships, they no longer gather people to fill a void, but to share a vibration. Their circle grows smaller, yet more radiant. They no longer feel guilty for outgrowing those who refuse to evolve, because they have learned that energy is sacred currency. They now invest only in relationships where there is reciprocity, not obligation. Their presence no longer feeds dysfunction. It fuels truth. Every conversation, every connection becomes a mirror reflecting the depth of their growth. Friendships built on gossip or pretense fade, replaced by those who honor presence, honesty, and growth. Through all of this, the empath becomes what Jung once called the fully integrated individual, one who embraces both light and shadow without losing compassion. They no longer live at the mercy of emotions. They master them. They no longer seek belonging through pain. They embody it through peace. Their spirituality is no longer an escape, but a grounded awareness that transforms every corner of their life. Love becomes conscious. Family becomes truthful. Work becomes aligned, and friendship becomes sacred. This is the empath's true awakening, a life no longer powered by suffering, but illuminated by discernment, strength, and spiritual wisdom. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more deep insights like this. Let's raise collective awareness and heal together through spiritual wisdom. Comment below. I am transforming with love and purpose. If you're ready to create conscious relationships and a better world. 8. Death and rebirth of identity. The death and rebirth of identity is one of the most profound stages of spirituality and spiritual development because it forces you to confront the painful truth that not everything you once were is meant to follow you into the person you are becoming. Carl Jung said that there is no coming to consciousness without pain, and you begin to understand this the moment you feel the old layers of your identity starting to fall away. The moment you realize that the roles you performed for acceptance, the patterns you kept for survival, and the personas you wore for love are no longer compatible with the truth rising within you. This inner shedding feels like loss, even when it is liberation. And as your false self begins to die, it brings with it a kind of grief that is difficult to explain, because you are not just letting go of people or habits. You are letting go of the version of yourself you presented to the world for years. And as this older identity dissolves, relationships that once felt familiar begin to feel distant. Conversations that once comforted you start to drain you. And environments that once felt like home become places where you can no longer breathe. What many people call loneliness appears, but for the empath in transformation, this loneliness slowly becomes sacred. It becomes a sanctuary where you finally hear your intuition without interference. A place where you no longer carry the weight of trying to be who everyone expects you to be. In this solitude, you begin to understand that separation is not abandonment. It is alignment. You are not losing people. You are losing illusions. You are not breaking down. You are breaking open. This phase is the metamorphosis Jung spoke of, the inner death that makes rebirth possible. And even though this transformation feels heavy, it is the first time you start to sense your real strength. The empath, who once absorbed every emotion around them, begins to recognize what is theirs and what is not. The person who once shaped themselves to fit the room begins to reshape the room with their presence. You start to understand that your sensitivity, once treated as a weakness, was always your compass. And now that you are no longer hiding it, it becomes your power. As the false identity continues to fall away, you stop apologizing for your boundaries, you stop explaining your intuition, and you stop negotiating your worth. You begin choosing peace over approval, truth over comfort, and authenticity over belonging. And with every internal shift, you step closer to the person you were always meant to be before the world taught you to shrink. This is the quiet rebirth, not loud, not dramatic, but steady and undeniable, the moment you finally see yourself without distortion. It is the moment the empath evolves from a passive absorber of energy into an aware guardian of their own inner world. It is the moment you realize that the old self did not die because something was wrong with you, but because something powerful was awakening inside you. And as you continue walking forward, you begin to see that the death of the false self was not an ending. It was the beginning of the truest chapter of your spiritual development. The chapter where you finally live from your essence instead of your wounds, from your clarity instead of your fear, and from your inner truth instead of the expectations that once shaped your entire life. 9. Practical path to integration. You begin this path of inner integration by acknowledging suppressed emotions, because the truth is that the feelings you bury do not dissolve. They crystallize into quiet patterns that shape your choices without your consent. When you dare to name your grief, your irritation, your disappointment, your fear, or the exhaustion you have carried for years, you take back authorship of your inner life. Carl Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this is the cornerstone of your transformation. Allowing yourself to see what you once hid. As you breathe into these emotions instead of resisting them, your nervous system learns that truth is safer than denial, and you begin to release the weight you once mistook for personality. From this emotional clarity, you can finally reclaim your intuition and your self-trust, the two abilities society often trains empaths to abandon. You override your inner no to keep the peace. You silence your instinct to avoid conflict, and you distrust your own perception because others tell you that you are too sensitive. But intuition is not a weakness, it is guidance. Self-trust is not arrogance, it is alignment. When you start honoring even the smallest signals, a tight jaw, a sudden exhaustion, a shift in your gut, you begin rebuilding the internal compass that has always loved you. Self-trust grows not from perfection, but from keeping small promises to yourself until your inner voice becomes stronger than the noise around you. With this renewed clarity, you learn to practice selective empathy, a core expression of spiritual wisdom that protects you from emotional burnout. You no longer confuse compassion with responsibility because you finally understand that loving someone does not mean carrying their entire emotional world. You are allowed to witness without absorbing, to care without collapsing, to support without sacrificing your own well-being. You ask yourself simple but powerful questions. Is this mine to hold? Is this the right moment? Am I the right person? And if any answer is no, you step back with grace instead of guilt, knowing that boundaries do not limit love, they refine it. This inner strength naturally leads you to speak truth without fear, because silence that protects a lie becomes a slow betrayal of your soul. Your words do not have to be loud to be powerful. They only need to be clean. When you say what you truly mean, even with a shaking voice, you reclaim integrity as a lived practice instead of a concept. You discover who respects your honesty and who depended on your silence. Jung reminded us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And truth-telling is one of the ways you honor that privilege every day. Finally, you build new boundaries and values your internal architecture for a life you can stand inside with dignity. Without boundaries, your empathy becomes a weapon others can use against you. With boundaries, it becomes a gift that flows instead of drains. You define what you will always protect: your rest, your solitude, your prayer, your creativity, your mental clarity, your emotional safety, and what you will no longer negotiate: disrespect, manipulation, guilt-driven expectations, or spiritual bypassing disguised as love. These vows become the quiet laws of your sovereignty, guiding your choices with steadiness instead of fear. When these practices weave together, feeling what you suppressed, trusting what you know, loving with discernment, speaking your truth, and honoring your values, you shift from survival into sovereignty. You no longer live as a sponge for other people's chaos, but as a steward of your own energy. This is the empath's most dangerous transformation, the one Carl Jung foresaw. Not a descent into harshness, but a rise into clarity, where your compassion finally has structure and your light finally has protection. 10. Becoming whole and dangerous to exploitation. Integrated empaths are not cold. They are complete, and this completeness is what makes them powerful in a world that once fed on their softness. They embody a balance that many people never reach: strong yet soft, compassionate yet boundaried, loving yet independent, sensitive yet unmanipulable. As you step into this level of inner integration, you begin to understand why Carl Jung warned that the most spiritually awakened empath becomes dangerous, not because they harm others, but because they can no longer be controlled by systems built on exploitation, gaslighting, and deceit. Every part of you that once apologized for existing now stands in alignment with itself, and that alignment becomes your shield. This transformation begins the moment you stop chasing approval and realize you no longer need permission to trust what you feel. When you cease outsourcing your sense of truth, the old power structures around you crumble. You recognize that what you once called kindness was sometimes a survival strategy, a way to keep peace, avoid conflict, and protect others from their own emotions. As your spirituality deepens, you reclaim your intuition not as a vague emotional reaction, but as a precise form of intelligence that reveals who is genuine and who is simply familiar with your triggers. With this clarity, you learn to separate compassion from compliance. Compassion honors your heart, while compliance sacrifices your boundaries. Once you understand the difference, you stop rescuing people from consequences they created. You stop translating disrespect into excuses like they're stressed, and you stop stepping into roles you were never meant to carry. Every boundary you set without guilt sharpens your spiritual awakening, making your energy clearer and warmer, no longer distorted by fear or people-pleasing. This is when you start seeing the architecture of manipulation without absorbing it. You notice the tone that does not match the words, the stories that keep shifting, the apologies that only work if you silence yourself. When you trust these signals, deceit loses its power because it can no longer root itself in your compassion. As your inner balance strengthens, your worth detaches from self-sacrifice and reconnects to self-respect. Instead of giving to be chosen, you give from overflow. Instead of performing for love, you offer connection honestly. Instead of clinging to relationships built on potential, you choose those built on reciprocity. These choices make you dangerous in the most necessary way, because you no longer provide predators with the hiding places they used to find in your empathy. You stop being available to emotional chaos and start being consistent with yourself, saying no without apology, forgiving without reopening doors, loving without abandoning your own clarity, and listening without losing the sound of your own voice. This is the posture that intimidates exploitative people. You cannot be gaslit because you now verify. You cannot be drained because you now protect your energy. You cannot be deceived because you trust the truth your body communicates before your mind rationalizes it away. Each time you choose truth over harmony, you shift from peacekeeping to peacemaking. Peacekeeping silences you to keep others comfortable, but peacemaking restores what is real, even if it disrupts the illusion. This marks the moment your empathy evolves from a wound into a strength, from a liability into a gift, from a soft target into a clear presence that is loving but not permissive. In this integrated state, you no longer audition for acceptance or negotiate your worth. You belong to yourself more than to anyone's narrative, and with that belonging comes discernment. You no longer confuse intensity for intimacy, attention for affection, or proximity for loyalty. You no longer let gratitude blind you to patterns of entitlement. This is what makes the awakened empath truly dangerous to exploitation, not rage, not bitterness, but coherence. A coherent empath cannot be talked out of what they know, shamed into giving what they do not owe, or manipulated into rebuilding cages they have already outgrown. In this wholeness, your sensitivity becomes the wise instrument it was always meant to be tuned to truth, anchored in self-respect, and aligned with a spirituality that protects your light rather than draining it. In the end, Jung's warning is clear. When an empath finally integrates their shadow, trusts their intuition, and stops allowing the world to define their worth, they become someone who can no longer be controlled. This transformation isn't about becoming dangerous to others. It's about becoming unshakable within yourself. If this message from spiritual wisdom resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming videos on Carl Jung, healing, and inner awakening. When you finally choose yourself, the whole world shifts. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. Welcome to Spiritual Wisdom, where today we explore what happens when you finally stop betraying yourself to please others. When you choose yourself, the entire energy of your life begins to shift. People, opportunities, and even challenges start to align with your true path. This is not selfishness, it's self-realization. So as you listen, ask yourself, have I truly chosen myself yet? Comment below with, I choose my peace, if you're ready to honor your authentic self and step into a life that reflects your deepest truth. 1. Choosing yourself is the most important decision you'll ever make. Most people spend their entire lives trying to please others, parents, society, and invisible audiences that exist only in their minds, without realizing that the greatest act of love is choosing themselves. To choose yourself means to stop performing, to stop chasing validation, and to finally live in alignment with your truth. This is where spirituality begins, when you no longer sacrifice your inner peace for external approval. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's exactly what happens when you make the decision to honor your authentic self instead of the roles you were taught to play. You begin to reclaim the energy you once gave away in guilt, fear, and endless compromise. And that energy becomes the foundation of your awakening. Choosing yourself does not mean rejecting others. It means rejecting the version of you that exists only to be liked. It's the moment you stop asking for permission to exist and start living from the center of your being. You begin to listen to your intuition instead of the noise around you. You learn to say no without explanation, to rest without guilt, to speak your truth without trembling. At first, it feels uncomfortable because your nervous system has been trained to equate peace with danger. But each time you choose yourself, you retrain your soul to feel safe in its authenticity. This is the heart of spiritual awakening, reclaiming the power to be real, even when it costs you comfort. Carl Jung's concept of individuation explains this beautifully. Your soul's purpose is to become whole, not perfect. Wholeness means embracing both your light and your shadow, recognizing that the parts you've rejected are also part of your divine design. When you accept your flaws with compassion, you stop fighting yourself and start flowing with life. And as you align with your truth, the outer world mirrors that transformation. The right people appear, not because you chase them, but because your energy has shifted. The right opportunities unfold because you've stopped resisting what you were meant to do. The world adjusts to the vibration of someone who has chosen themselves, because authenticity has a frequency that cannot be ignored. The practice begins in small, sacred moments. When you choose rest over constant productivity, when you walk away from what drains your spirit, when you speak, even if your voice shakes, you are declaring to the universe, I matter. These daily acts of self-loyalty are not selfish. They are spiritual rituals that align you with divine truth. Over time, Your inner world becomes peaceful, grounded, and self-assured. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop explaining and start embodying. You begin to feel what true freedom is, the quiet confidence of knowing that your life belongs to you. And when you reach that place, the whole world shifts, not because it changed, but because you did. This is spirituality in motion, the living proof that choosing yourself is the most important decision you will ever make. Comment below, I choose myself today, if you're ready to honor your worth and step fully into your power. Let this simple declaration remind you that every moment you choose yourself, the universe begins to shift in your favor. 2. Authenticity brings inner peace and ends the inner war. When you stop performing and start honoring the truth of who you are, something powerful begins to unfold inside you. The war between your mind and your soul starts to quiet. The voice that once demanded you to be more, to do more, to please more, slowly fades into the background. You stop living to meet expectations and begin living to meet your essence. True peace does not come from fixing every problem, but from releasing the resistance that keeps you fighting life itself. You begin to realize that peace is not a reward waiting at the end of achievement. It is the natural rhythm of a heart aligned with authenticity. When you accept yourself fully, you no longer chase approval like a shadow. You breathe easier, move slower, and see life with clearer eyes. As you walk this path, your spirituality deepens. You stop seeing the world as something to conquer and start experiencing it as something to harmonize with. You learn that spirituality is not found in temples or rituals alone, but in the courage to live truthfully every single day. Each time you honor your feelings, you strengthen the bridge between your inner truth and your outer expression. That bridge becomes unshakable, allowing you to face criticism or uncertainty without collapsing into self-doubt. You no longer fear rejection because you have stopped rejecting yourself. You no longer crave validation because you have remembered your own worth. Living authentically does not mean life becomes effortless. It means you stop wasting energy pretending. When you say yes, only when you mean it, and no, when your soul whispers no, you reclaim the energy once lost to self-betrayal. That energy transforms into clarity, creativity, and quiet confidence. You begin to attract people and opportunities that resonate with your vibration, and naturally, those that drain you begin to fall away. This is not loss, it is liberation. The more you align your choices with your truth, the lighter your life feels. Every authentic act becomes a step toward wholeness. Through this journey, spiritual development becomes the foundation of your strength. You no longer seek peace outside of yourself because you recognize it as your natural state. You understand that spirituality is not about escaping reality, but embracing it with full presence and compassion. Challenges still arise, but you no longer meet them with panic. You meet them with awareness. Every storm becomes a teacher, every wound a doorway to wisdom. You realize that authenticity and spirituality are inseparable, one reveals the other. And as you grow in truth, life responds differently. The people around you sense your calm energy and adjust to it. The world stops feeling like a battlefield and begins to feel like a sacred mirror reflecting your inner state. This is the quiet revolution of the soul. No drama, no noise, only the steady glow of someone who has remembered who they are. The real transformation was never about becoming something new, but about returning to the person you were before the world taught you to hide. When you live this way, peace is no longer a distant goal. It becomes your daily experience. Authenticity ends the inner war because it unites every fragmented part of you into harmony, where your thoughts, emotions, and actions move as one. Are you ready to live in alignment with your true self? If so, take this moment to affirm your peace. Comment below, "I choose authenticity," to declare your commitment to ending the inner war and embracing the calm that comes from living in truth. 3. Choosing yourself disrupts the status quo. When you finally choose yourself, you disrupt the illusion that the world has built around you. Your authenticity shakes the ground of those still hiding behind their masks. The moment you begin living in truth, others may call you selfish, arrogant, or rebellious, not because you are wrong, but because your courage exposes their fears. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And once you've tasted the clarity of self-alignment, you cannot return to the dull comfort of conformity. You've seen too much, felt too deeply, and awakened too profoundly to ever live as a version edited for approval. People will try to pull you back into the roles you once played because your freedom threatens their control. But when you begin walking in spiritual wisdom, you realize that self-approval is far more powerful than social acceptance. This is the essence of spiritual awakening understanding, that choosing yourself isn't an act of selfishness, but an act of spiritual responsibility. You can't pour love from an empty cup. You can't bring light to the world while dimming your own. And so you stop apologizing for protecting your peace, for setting boundaries, for saying no to what drains your soul. You begin to honor your energy like sacred currency, spending it only on what aligns with your purpose. It's not an easy path. The moment you stop people-pleasing, the world grows quiet. The noise fades, and in that silence, you meet yourself. Jung reminded us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Choosing yourself is exactly that, bringing light into your unconscious, facing your shadow, and refusing to live by inherited scripts. You realize that every mask you once wore was simply fear disguised as belonging. But true belonging begins when you no longer betray yourself to fit in. When guilt arises, and it will understand that it is a sign of transformation. Guilt is the echo of your old self, resisting your new boundaries. But you are not here to please the past version of you. You are here to honor the evolved one. And as you do, relationships shift. Some people will leave, not because you failed them, but because your growth reminded them of the changes they're avoiding. Do not chase. Let them walk their path as you walk yours. The garden of your soul will bloom again with those who can breathe your new air. Your power lies in alignment. When your thoughts, emotions, words, and actions match, your presence speaks louder than your explanations. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth because your energy declares it. That's when life begins to move differently. Doors open, synchronicities appear, and peace replaces the need for validation. The world doesn't change because you fight it. It changes because you stop fighting yourself. So when the world calls your courage rebellion, remember that chaos to them is liberation to your soul. You are not rejecting the world. You are simply returning to your essence. You are learning to live from the inside out. Every time you say no to what feels wrong, you say yes to the life that was always meant for you. As Jung said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. And in that awakening, you realize this one sacred truth. Choosing yourself was never about leaving others behind. It was about finally coming home to who you are. If this message awakened something within you, subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom for more insights on how choosing yourself can transform your entire reality and challenge the world's expectations. 4. It's a daily practice, not a one-time decision. Choosing yourself is not a single decision. It is a living practice that breathes through every hour of your life. It's the art of returning again and again to what feels true, even when fear tempts you to perform for approval. Some days, it feels natural, like sunlight falling through a window. Other days, it's a quiet battle between your conditioning and your soul. As Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This privilege is not granted once it is earned daily through awareness, honesty, and the courage to stand in your own truth. To choose yourself means to commit to self-alignment every time the world asks you to compromise. It is looking in the mirror and saying, I will not betray myself to be liked. On days when you fall back into old habits, the practice is to notice it gently and begin again. This is spirituality in motion. Real spiritual awakening is not about light alone, but about the discipline of returning to truth, no matter how many times you drift away. It's the sacred act of walking yourself home, over and over, until authenticity becomes your natural rhythm. You begin to understand that spiritual growth is not found in grand moments, but in the small, often invisible ones. Choosing honesty over comfort, integrity over applause, inner peace over external validation. Each time you choose truth, your inner world shifts, and the outer world slowly rearranges to reflect it. You learn to say no without guilt, to rest without shame, and to let silence replace forced connection. These moments become the proof that you are no longer living from fear, but from alignment. There will be days when doubt returns, whispering that you are too much or not enough. On those days, remember that choosing yourself is not defiance, it's devotion. It is the quiet courage to protect your energy and honor your own boundaries. As Jung taught, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When you choose yourself, you bring that unconscious loyalty to suffering into the light and transform it into conscious loyalty to truth. Over time, this daily practice rewires your entire being. Your body begins to relax into honesty. Your breath deepens when your actions match your values. Your heart softens as you stop chasing approval and start living from presence. You no longer perform, you simply are. And as your vibration stabilizes in truth, your relationships, work, and environment begin to mirror that same integrity back to you. This is not magic. It is an energetic law. The outer world always catches up to the inner one. So when the old patterns call you back to smallness, breathe, observe, and return. Forgive yourself for every moment you forget who you are. The strength lies not in never falling, but in always returning to authenticity. Choosing yourself is a spiritual awakening disguised as a daily habit, a commitment to live aligned with your soul, no matter how often the world tries to pull you off course. And each time you choose truth over performance, you reclaim a little more of your power, a little more of your peace, and a little more of the person you were always meant to become. If you've made it this far, you're clearly committed to your own growth. Comment below, "I'm practicing daily," to affirm your dedication to choosing yourself again and again every single day. 5. The result is radical transformation across your life. When you finally choose yourself, a radical transformation begins to ripple through every part of your life. The moment you stop betraying your inner truth, you start reclaiming your energy from everything that drains your soul. Your work begins to change you, no longer chase validation through endless effort or meaningless performance. Instead, you start aligning your actions with your deeper purpose. You find that when you give yourself permission to say no to what feels wrong, the yes that remains carries more power, more clarity, and more heart. Each task becomes an extension of your authentic self, and that authenticity breathes new life into your creativity, focus, and confidence. Slowly, what once felt like work becomes an expression of meaning. Your body begins to follow this internal alignment. The stress and fatigue that came from self-betrayal start to dissolve. The tension you've carried in your shoulders, the restlessness that lived in your sleep, and the anxiety that whispered in your thoughts begin to quiet down. When you choose yourself, your nervous system finally exhales. Your body starts to heal because it no longer has to fight against your truth. This healing is not only physical, it is energetic. It is the direct reflection of spirituality at work within you, reminding you that inner alignment is the foundation of outer peace. Your relationships, too, begin to shift. When you live honestly, you stop seeking love through performance. You no longer attract those who feed off your compliance. You attract those who value your truth. Conversations deepen because you are no longer afraid of being misunderstood. You start to connect through honesty, not through pretending. Love becomes mutual, not manipulative. Friendship becomes real, not transactional. The energy that once went into keeping up appearances is now invested in building authentic bonds. This is the quiet reward of spiritual development, the unfolding of genuine connection born from integrity. As you evolve, the world mirrors that evolution. You start attracting experiences that match your new vibration. The projects that come your way feel purposeful. The opportunities that appear seem divinely timed. Even challenges begin to look different. Instead of seeing them as punishment, you see them as initiation, each one designed to strengthen your boundaries and deepen your self-trust. You no longer live a mechanical life driven by external expectation. You live a meaningful life guided by inner wisdom. And through all this, spirituality stops being an abstract idea. It becomes your daily practice, the way you speak, rest, decide, and move through the world. It is not about escaping reality. It is about infusing it with awareness. Spiritual development means learning to live in truth even when it's uncomfortable, choosing integrity over approval, and peace over perfection. You learn that the universe doesn't reward who you pretend to be. It responds to who you really are. So remember these lessons. Protect your energy by honoring your truth. Let go of what drains you, even when it's familiar. Speak honestly, even when your voice shakes. Rest without guilt, knowing recovery is sacred. And measure success, not by applause, but by alignment. Because when you finally choose yourself, the whole world shifts, not because it changes, but because you do. And from that shift, everything begins to fall into divine order. Do you feel the shift happening within you? If you do, declare it boldly in the comments. I am transforming, and my life is aligning with divine purpose. 6. The cost of not choosing yourself is a slow death. Every time you betray your truth, every time you say yes when your soul is screaming no, a part of you quietly dies inside. Each forced smile that hides your pain, each moment you pretend to be fine just to keep the peace, takes you further away from your essence. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Yet most people live as fragments of themselves, imprisoned by the need for approval, terrified to disappoint others. Life becomes mechanical, flavorless, a performance where your true self is exiled behind masks of politeness and survival. But authenticity is oxygen for the soul. Without it, you don't live, you merely exist. You were not born to perform. You were born to be alive, to feel deeply, to embody your truth without apology. The pain you feel when you abandon yourself is your spirit's way of begging you to come home. Choosing yourself doesn't mean rejecting others. It means refusing to reject yourself. It is an act of courage, a declaration that your peace, your boundaries, your soul matter. There will never be a perfect moment to honor who you are. The time is always now. Every delay is a slow decay of your spirit. Jung taught that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When you constantly ignore your truth, you let fear, guilt, and external validation run your life, and you mistake that chaos for destiny. But spiritual wisdom begins when you stop betraying your inner voice and start listening to it instead. That voice doesn't scream. It whispers. It guides. It knows. It's the compass of your higher self trying to lead you back to alignment, back to freedom. The moment you finally choose yourself, everything begins to shift. The world mirrors your new vibration. Opportunities align and relationships transform. You stop chasing people who drain your light because you now understand that your energy is sacred. You no longer apologize for your boundaries or your truth because you realize that peace is more valuable than approval. Choosing yourself means saying no when it's not right, walking away when your soul feels heavy, and loving yourself enough to protect your own energy. It's the turning point where you stop living reactively and begin living intentionally, where you exchange self-sacrifice for self-respect. The cost of not choosing yourself is slow death, death of joy, death of creativity, death of your divine connection to life itself. But the reward of choosing yourself is liberation. When you honor your truth, you stop betraying your soul. The numbness fades, the light returns, and you remember that being alive is not about existing. It's about expanding, creating, and becoming. And in that moment of deep remembrance, the universe responds. It opens doors that were once closed and aligns you with everything meant for your highest path. Because when you finally choose yourself, you don't lose the world, you transform it. Leave a like and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss content that helps you awaken and transform your life. Type in the comments, "I choose myself," and "I choose life." When you finally choose yourself, you stop waiting for the world to validate you, and instead, you begin to create the world you deserve. This is the moment when life starts to align with your truth, when opportunities, people, and miracles naturally gravitate toward your energy. Remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's sacred. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos filled with spiritual insights and transformative truths.